You are listening to The Vocal Technologist. Spoken tech for your ears.
There is a very real chance that the faster we can build digital products, the worse they are actually getting.
Yeah, look, it's a controversial thought, but when you look closely at the underlying architecture being shipped right now, well, it is hard to argue against it.
If you are a time-poor professional or just someone with a curious mind trying to figure out why your apps and devices feel simultaneously more advanced and, more broken than ever, you are in the right place. We are going to unpack the massive tension right now between rapid creation and structural integrity in tech and design.
Because the gap between how things look and how they actually work is it is widening at a terrifying pace.
It really is. We have been looking under the hood of a massive stack of research papers, leaked tech specs, and design postmortems to pull apart this obsession with speed. Because honestly, I reckon a lot of companies are prioritizing the appearance of progress over actual functional design.
Right, it is basically a structural illusion. I mean, we are building faster, but the foundations are becoming incredibly brittle.
Exactly. Let us get into the first major trap, which is this new phenomenon people are calling vibe coding.
Oh, vibe coding.
Yeah. You have tools like Google Stitch where you can just generate user interfaces at lightning speed. You type in what you want and boom, there is an interface.
Huh.
But here's the catch. These tools are producing executable prototypes.
And we need to be really clear about what an executable prototype actually is. It means the application runs on your screen, you can click the buttons, and it looks finished.
It feels like a real app.
It does feel real, but underneath, there is no database structure, no security protocols, and no scalable logic. It is just an empty visual shell.
Wow.
Yet, the cultural expectation in the industry right now is that you need to show that visible output immediately before anyone will actually trust you to make architectural decisions.
Which is exactly like building a beautiful house out of cardboard movie props. It looks brilliant from the street. You can take a nice photo of it. But here's the thing. You cannot plumb a toilet in a cardboard house. You cannot run electrical wiring through it. Because apparently, looking like you have done the work is somehow more important than actually doing it.
That is a perfect way to look at it. What is fascinating here is that the term vibe coding completely obscures what is actually happening. I mean, you're not coding.
Right.
A much more honest name for this trend would be vibe prototyping. When you demand immediate visual results, you are effectively replacing invisible structural reasoning with the mere appearance of progress. And that is leading directly into what we call productivity paralysis.
But hold on, I need to push back here for a second. If an artificial intelligence writes 90% of the code in 10 seconds, is that not an absolute miracle?
Well, you would think so, right?
Yeah. I mean, why are we complaining about the final 10% when we just save 3 weeks of manual typing?
Because you are assuming the first 90% is structurally sound.
Mm-hmm.
And it usually is not.
Mm.
We're seeing platforms like Cursor 3, which is a huge artificial intelligence coding platform right now.
Right, Cursor 3?
It has a chatbot interface. It runs cloud and desktop agents simultaneously. It even has a dedicated design mode for editing user interfaces. It moves development at a blistering pace.
Okay, so it is incredibly fast.
Extremely fast. But that 90% it generates is often visually complete, but logically flawed. The final 10% is not just tweaking colors or moving buttons. It is untangling a massive web of structural tech debt.
Ah, so getting it to look right takes 10 seconds, but fixing the underlying logic is an absolute nightmare.
Yes, exactly.
Hmm.
That final stretch requires significant human judgment and architectural planning. But because the machine did the first part so effortlessly, the human user feels paralyzed.
Because of the sudden effort required.
Exactly. There's a steep cognitive effort required to actually finish the job properly, and people just freeze up. Productivity paralysis.
You see the consequences of this rushing everywhere. If you have ever felt completely exhausted just trying to navigate a new app update, this is exactly why. You are feeling the friction of vibe coding.
You really are.
I was looking at what YouTube is testing on their Android layout. They are experimenting with replacing or hiding video titles entirely and swapping them out for collapsible artificial intelligence summaries.
Which fundamentally alters how a user navigates a platform.
It creates massive cognitive overload. A video title is a highly intentional piece of human communication. Hiding it behind an automated summary risks destroying key metrics like click-through rate and watch time.
It really does.
It is a classic case of cramming automated generation into a space just because you can, without considering the structural integrity of the user experience.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this reliance on pure speed is resulting in incredibly shallow outputs. And what is really interesting is how users are beginning to actively rebel against it.
They absolutely are. People are getting sick of the slop. Just look at the video generation app, Sora.
Oh, the drop-off there was massive.
Right, when it launched, everyone lost their minds. But then the monthly downloads plummeted from 6 million down to 1.5 million.
Which is a staggering loss of interest.
People realized the glitchy, weirdly smooth content was actually quite unpleasant to look at. It was unfun. But why exactly does it feel unfun?
Well, we call that the aesthetics of failure. You see, we have highly evolved visual processing systems. When a generated video shows a person walking, the physics are often slightly floating, or the shadows do not align with the light source.
Right, like something is just slightly off.
Exactly. You might not consciously know the math is wrong, but your brain is hardwired by millions of years of evolution to detect when gravity or motion is unnatural. It triggers a subtle uncanny valley effect.
Oh, wow.
That is why the novelty wears off so quickly. The human eye actually craves structural truth.
Speaking of structural truth, did you see the drama with that restaurant in Santa Cruz?
The logo incident, yeah.
They used a generated logo for their business, and the local community unleashed a massive backlash. It sparked this fierce debate.
It really touched a nerve.
It did. On one side, you have people arguing that small businesses need affordability, but on the other side, people are violently defending the value of human craftsmanship.
And it raises an important question about what a brand actually is. I mean, a brand is not just an image. It is a cultural marker.
Right.
These automated outputs are only as good as the specific cultural constraints and brand rules we feed them. Without that, they're just sterile approximations. Context is the ultimate filter for quality.
And users are desperate for personality. Which brings me to my absolute favorite story. Marvel revealed the logo for their new Wonder Man series.
Oh yes, this was brilliant.
And instead of some dynamic comic book style art, they use this incredibly sterile, minimalist, impact style font. It is just a gray gradient. And the internet lost its collective mind.
They really did.
Fans were roasting it, literally demanding, and I quote, justice for serifs. I am genuinely amused that we have reached a point in human history where the internet is angrily protesting for the return of serifs on fonts.
It is funny, but it makes perfect sense. Minimalism became the default for tech companies because it scales easily across digital platforms.
Right, it is efficient.
But users now associate minimalism with the very frictionless automated slop we are talking about. They want the quirks, the flair, the human touch that things like serifs represent.
So how do we fix it? Because the tools are not going away.
Well, the fix is reclaiming context. Some platforms are starting to figure this out. Figma Make, for example, has introduced Make kits for component libraries and Make attachments where you can upload real documents and datasets.
Wait, so how does a Make kit actually change the output?
It mathematically constrains the system. Instead of asking for a generic login screen and getting a hallucinated mess of random colors, the Make kit forces the system to only select from a predefined grid of your specific brand colors. It uses your typography rules and your padding measurements. It stops the output from looking generic because it is forced to use your highly specific constraints.
So it is putting walls around the automation.
Exactly. Another great example is Hickfield Soul 2. They are bringing art-directed quality to image generation by leveraging actual fashion history.
Fashion history.
Yeah, they use it to accurately represent diverse aesthetics and skin tones. And they have a feature called Soul ID, where you only need 20 photos to train the model on a highly specific, personalized aesthetic.
Oh, that is clever. It is the same in audio, too. 11 Labs has an iOS app called 11 Music. It generates full 3-minute songs from text prompts going head-to-head with Google Lyria 3 Pro.
Right. The audio generation space is moving incredibly fast.
But the success of these tools will entirely depend on how much specific human context you can actually feed into them.
And we are seeing this exact same battle playing out in the physical world, too. I mean, hardware is facing its own existential crisis trying to house all these invisible tools.
Oh, it absolutely is. It is not just digital interfaces suffering from this identity crisis. Hardware manufacturers are suddenly panicking, trying to figure out how to build a physical home for all this ambient technology.
And it is leading to some incredibly forced physical designs.
Exactly. Let us look at the ex-Apple engineers who built a dedicated artificial intelligence button. It is a physical piece of hardware that looks exactly like an old iPod shuffle.
A little plastic square.
Yeah, you pin it to your shirt, you press it, and you talk. And for the life of me, they cannot explain why it should not just be a smartphone app.
It is a classic solution searching for a problem. Hardware succeeds when it solves a physical friction point.
It is like trying to reinvent the standalone pocket calculator when every single person on Earth already has a supercomputer in their pocket. Why would I carry another device?
You would not.
Compare that to something like Poke. Poke is a new assistant, but it works entirely through text messaging. You use iMessage or SMS.
Which is brilliant.
You do not even need to install a new app, let alone buy a plastic button. It meets the user exactly where they already are.
And that is the essence of good structural design.
Yeah.
It removes bottlenecks rather than adding a new physical object to your life. But when you look at hardware that does make sense, like foldables, well, the physical form is actually solving a problem.
Right. Let us look under the hood of the new foldable iPhone in development. The leaked physical dimensions are super interesting.
You really are.
It is actually wider and shorter than the current Pro Max models when it is closed, but it unfolds into a 7.8-inch display, which is very close to an iPad mini. And Apple is keeping it on track for its scheduled launch, despite how complex the production is.
And that wider, shorter aspect ratio solves a physical friction point. It provides a much better screen for landscape viewing when unfolded, but notice the compromises they have to make.
The security features.
Yes, they are dropping Face ID and going back to Touch ID.
Which is wild for an ultra-premium Apple device, but why go backward on the security tech?
Because a foldable phone has to be incredibly thin on both halves, so it does not feel like a brick when it is closed.
Oh, right, space constraints.
Exactly. There physically is not enough depth in the chassis to house the complex dot projector cameras required for Face ID. So they have to revert to Touch ID embedded in the power button.
That makes so much sense. Form dictating function. But speaking of form, Apple is also dropping the black color option entirely for the iPhone 18 Pro, just like they did for the 17 Pro.
Right, moving away from neutral tones.
They are relying on distinctive status colors, like cosmic orange.
That is a fascinating psychological play. A black phone is functional, it just fades into the background. Cosmic orange is a tangible status symbol.
It is a statement.
It visually communicates that you have the newest, most expensive device.
They want people across the street to know exactly what you are holding. It is all about capturing that high-end market, which you can also see with Apple acquiring Motion VFX.
Yes, the visual effects company.
That signals a massive renewed focus on pro software and services, specifically tying into things like Apple Creator Studio.
So whether it is a bright orange phone, a foldable screen, or a piece of pro software, it all comes down to the user experience. But what is critical to understand is that the ultimate measure of a product is not how it looks.
No.
It is the invisible layer of UX that protects and respects the user.
This is something that gets ignored so often, the invisible layer. For example, people who use screen readers experience digital interfaces as a linear stream of spoken audio.
Exactly. They do not see a grid of pretty images.
Think of it like taking a beautifully painted map and forcing someone to navigate by only reading them a list of the coordinates. If you did not label the coordinates right, the paint job is entirely useless.
And this is where rapid, vibe-coded design completely falls apart. If a developer uses icon buttons or emojis without providing proper text alternatives based on roles, names, and states, the interface becomes completely broken for assistive technology.
Just a mess of broken audio.
Take the folded hands emoji, for example.
The one people use for praying or saying thank you.
Exactly. A screen reader does not read the sentiment. It literally reads out the official structural character name. So if you do not code the structural layer correctly, you are actively excluding users.
It is wild that we spend so much time making things look pretty, but we ignore the structural bones. But I think human-centered design is finally having to grow up.
It is being forced to.
Especially with new EU regulations coming into play. The goal is shifting away from just making task completion as frictionless as possible and moving towards preserving human autonomy.
Which is a necessary evolution. For years, frictionless design was the holy grail in tech. But when everything is frictionless, users can be easily manipulated.
It is exactly like a casino.
That is a good way to put it.
Frictionless design without ethics is literally a casino. It is incredibly easy to walk around in. There are no clocks on the walls. The drinks come right to you. But every single detail, from the carpet pattern to the lighting, is architected to quietly strip away your agency and keep you engaged.
That analogy is frighteningly accurate when applied to the attention economy. And we see the most dangerous examples of this in ethical UX issues within mental health apps.
Oh, this boils my blood.
Many mental health apps use standard engagement tactics borrowed from social media or gaming. Things like daily streaks and aggressive push notifications just to keep you opening the app.
Gamifying trauma.
Yes.
Yeah.
And while a daily streak might be great for learning a language, applying that same manipulative dopamine loop to a vulnerable user who is managing anxiety or PTSD can actively harm them.
Of course it can.
If they miss a day, it induces immense guilt and breaks the therapeutic trust. Designers really have to build ethical protection into the core structure, not just the visual surface.
You can even see this return to structural integrity in typography. Look at MDUI. It is a neo-grotesque typeface that was years in the making.
And for those who might not know, neo-grotesque just means it is a highly clean, neutral font style.
Right, similar to something like Helvetica.
Designed to be incredibly readable without distracting decorative elements.
Right, but they did not just draw nice letters. They engineered it with ink traps and widened apertures specifically to fix word-level legibility for everyday interfacing contexts.
Which is such a structural approach to typography.
It really is. And an ink trap is literally a little notch cut into the corners of letters. So when that letter scales down on a tiny, low-resolution smartwatch screen, the pixels do not bleed together into a blurry mess. They built it to function perfectly in dense digital environments.
It is design that solves a structural problem rather than just chasing an aesthetic trend. We are seeing major brands invest heavily in this kind of deep structural thinking.
Oh, absolutely.
San Miguel, for instance, redesigned their packaging. And they did not just ask focus groups what looked nice. They used EEG and eye-tracking neuroscience to measure actual human responses.
Wow. Measuring brainwaves for beer packaging. How does an EEG even help with that?
It measures the electrical activity in the brain to see exactly which visual elements trigger cognitive ease versus confusion.
That is intense.
It really shows how serious the mechanics of design have become. The New York Times Magazine is another great example. They built a completely flexible design system that works seamlessly across print, digital, and audio formats.
So it adapts to whatever the medium is.
Yes, it is not just a visual refresh. It is an entirely new structural foundation for how media is consumed.
Because you cannot just make a nice document anymore and call it a day. It has to adapt to whatever screen or speaker the user prefers.
To summarize what we are seeing across all these fields, the role of the designer is fundamentally shifting. They are moving away from being specialized violin players who just focus on their one specific instrument.
Right. Just making a button look nice or picking a color palette.
Exactly. They are having to become generalist conductors. They must orchestrate cross-functional teams, manage automated tools, and ultimately protect user autonomy in a world that is desperately trying to automate everything.
I love that. From violin players to conductors, you have to oversee the whole symphony. Otherwise, the system is just going to play loud, chaotic slop. Which actually leaves me with a really unsettling thought. If we are rapidly building digital systems that are generated entirely by machines, and then we are navigating and summarizing those same systems with automated screen readers and agents, well, are we eventually going to stop designing for human eyes altogether?
It is a profound question. When the machine writes the code and another machine reads it, the human interface might become completely obsolete.
Now, there is something to keep you awake tonight. Catch you next time on Vocal Technologist.
Spoken Tech for your ears.